How's it going, New World? Sethphir here, and today we are back. This time we are going to be talking about top 5 weapon builds for dungeons or expeditions. We did the top 5 weapon builds for PvP, and a lot of you liked that video, but you wanted to know what people were using for PvE, so here I am to deliver that information, and I'm going to give you the rundown for what is best weapon builds, in my opinion, for PvE, for dungeons and expeditions, whatever you want to call them. So in order to talk about dungeons and expeditions, we have to understand the difference between the two dungeons that we have in the game currently, which is Garden of Genesis and Lazarus Instrumentality. The Garden of Genesis mobs are all of the Angry Earth category, which means they have a set of resistances and weaknesses appropriate to the Angry Earth archetype. So the resistances that they have, they're going to take 15% less damage from thrusting attacks and 40% less damage from lightning attacks. So you want to avoid bringing weapons that do those categories of damage for Garden of Genesis. They take 20% increased damage from slashing and 30% increased damage from fire. So that is going to be the ideal weapons that you're going to want to bring. So that's things like the Fire Staff, the Great Axe, and even weapon slots that have open sockets where you can put a gem that would make you do fire damage. That's going to come into high value in these dungeons. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here when we go over consumables and the pre-setup. So moving on to the Lazarus Instrumentality, we're going to be talking about Ancients. Ancients take 15% less damage from slashing, and they take 40% less damage from fire. So the Great Axe, the Hatchet, and the Fire Staff's not going to be too good in this dungeon. The next thing that they have is they're going to take 20% increased damage from striking, which is going to be Warhammer, 30% increased damage from lightning, and 15% increased damage from void. So as you can see, picking the right weapons for the right dungeon will shape that top 5 build or tier list. And this is going to be the same for any type of encounter that you're dealing with in PvE. The other types of encounters would be something like invasions and also arenas. The arenas have some different things that you may want to consider in there. So when we talk about those two, we'll discuss in a later video, but for now we're just going over dungeons and expeditions. So let's go ahead and move on to the consumable or pre-game setup before you enter the dungeon. You can do 93% more damage by just preparing for this dungeon. So the ways that you're going to get that damage coming in is going to be 12% from trophies, since basic trophies are the highest you could get for the Angry Earth and Ancients category currently in the game. The other two components are missing, but normally it would be 15%. So it's only 12 from that. You're going to get 15% from a weapon coating, which would be something like this. This is going to give your weapon a damage boost to a certain type of monster. So you'll get 15% from that. You will get 7% from a weapon honing stone, which is going to increase your damage by 7%. It goes on your character. It's a buff to your character, but do keep in mind that these weapon coatings are a buff to the individual weapon. So you will need to put it on one weapon, switch to the other weapon, and then put it on that other one. The next bonus is going to be coming from the Bane series of perks, which will be on your weapons, as you can see here. This is Ancient Bane 12%. This can scale up to 14% at level 600 gear, and it might be a little bit of a decimal value there. We're not sure how high it is exactly, but it's not past like 14.5. Then you can also get that for Angry Earth as well, so you kind of see the theme. You need the right weapon with the right perks and a socket so that you can put that gem in there, which is another thing we'll talk about. You can get 15% bonus damage from a gem, and that depends on how you want to use it. The Gambit gem is a good option because it will allow you to gain bonus damage when your stamina is not full. However, with the Void Gauntlet being introduced into the game and the Oblivion buff giving a lot of stamina regen, and stamina just being something that's kind of wishy-washy, like you may have stamina, you may not have stamina, so that 15% bonus isn't going to be active all the time. The best way to go about it would be to put an elemental gem into your weapon. So for this Void Gauntlet, it does Angry Earth damage, right? So if I wanted to use this in the Garden of Genesis, I would socket a fire gem into it. The 50% fire gem can be good, but I've heard that the 20% scaling on the gems can be a little bit higher for some of those weaker gems. I'll have to double check the math again, but I'm pretty confident the 50% gem will probably put out more considering the weakness of the monster. So if I'm hitting a monster that takes 30% more fire damage and half of my damage is being converted into extra fire, it's probably going to be more mathematically in the end. So that's going to be something to consider. So 15% coming from that. And then we'll talk about the 30% coming from the Rend debuff. Rend is a buff that comes from certain weapons that you will place on a monster. For example, Armor Breaker. When you get this Lasting Trauma talent, it will put a 20% damage absorption reduction on them, which is called Rend, which is going to lower their defense. So you can make them take 30% more damage from that, stacking different avenues of it. So that's going to be 93% more damage, and then you can also do an additional 15 to 30% more damage depending on your weapon type. For example, if I have a fire staff and I enter the Garden of Genesis, all of my moves are going to be hitting incredibly hard because they are fire, so they're getting boosted up from the monster's weakness. So you can do a lot of damage, almost double, even more than double damage by preparing in the proper way. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about those top 5 weapon builds for the dungeons. And we're going to talk about the difference between Garden of Genesis and Lazarus Instrumentality. So let's go ahead and dive into the weapons here. And we are going to have a few constants. And the constants are going to be the tank and the healer, as well as the mage. The mage will swap weapon a little bit slightly, but we need each of these classes for a certain reason. The tank is needed because, well, duh, he has to tank the bosses and all the monsters so people don't die. But his second use is going to be coming from the Warhammer and simply applying the Armor Breaker or Lasting Trauma debuff to the target, as well as using Shockwave with the perk gives a 10% armor reduction. So right here off the bat, the tank can put a full Rend debuff on a target, 20% from Armor Breaker and 10% from the Shockwave. So it's actually 9.5. It's a little off and sketchy, but it's close enough, right? Like 29.5. So right there, you're going to have full armor Rend value on a target, so he's going to be taking max damage. The next constant that we are going to have is going to be the healer. And actually, before we dive into that healer, let's go ahead and talk about the talent builds here. So for Sword and Shield, we'll go ahead and look at this. So the tank's going to be using the Sword and Shield talent build. My recommendation for a tank would be 300 strength and 200 constitution if you can get perfect gear. If you can't get perfect gear, then I would recommend going 200 in constitution and however much you can into strength. The point being is that you want to do damage. There is no monster in this game that is so threatening that he is going to kill you in one hit. Currently, it's all about speed and powering up the damage of your team, as well as contributing to that damage yourself. The point of these dungeons is going to be to do them quickly, not to absorb damage that wouldn't kill you anyways, right? The dungeons are not that hard. So when we talk about this build here, this is going to be the side we're going to use. We're going to focus on the Sword Master ability tree, and if you want to take a look at each individual talent, you can feel free to do so. I'm not going to point out everything, I'm just going to point out the important things on these weapon builds. So the most important things is to take this reverse stab ability, because down at the bottom we have an ability that gives us 25% cooldown on all sword abilities, even the shield category, whenever we hit somebody with reverse stab. This counts per monster hit, so if you hit 4 monsters total, you have instantly refunded all of your cooldowns. They should be all back up. So this can be very, very powerful. It is 100% important. You must have reverse stab as a tank. The other abilities are going to give us damage and crit, as well as the ability to slow with the light attack, which is important because a lot of strength users get bonuses from their attributes, which do more damage to targets that have crowd control effects on them, and you also get that yourself with the Opportunist talent, which is going to increase your damage even further. The next important thing is going to be Leaping Strike, because sometimes mobility is very key in dungeons. It also does a high amount of damage, especially to low health targets, so it can be very, very chunky. It offers you mobility to engage first and the ability to get away from a sticky situation, so you can use this ability to kite also. It's also just mandatory to get enough points to get down here to Leadership, which is going to be a very important ability. It's just going to give a 10% boost to your whole party. So if you're using this as a tank, that means that all 4 of your other party members are doing 10% damage. So by that logic, you could just add the extra damage that they're doing to yours, and all of a sudden you're pumping out crazy damage, right? That's how it works. Tanks are doing good DPS. All right, so now we'll go into the other side. We're just going to take some physical and magical resistance, as well as the block for the melee. It's important to have block for melee because most monsters in this game deal melee damage if they're threatening, right? There's never been like a mage that's blasted me for 9 million health, so I don't really need this ranged damage stamina reduction. What you do need is this fortify from whenever you block, and make sure that you have a defiant stance because it is a very, very strong damage mitigation ability, as well as your first AoE taunt when you have the Carnelian gem in your sword, which is going to be mandatory for you. So yes, I'm sorry, tanks, you're not going to be able to get bonus damage from having an elemental gem in your sword because for some reason you have to use a taunt gem. It's really sad and tragic. Please change this, Amazon. Like, just let us have taunt toggleable or something so we don't have to use a gem for it. That would be great. And then we're going to top it off with recuperation, which just gives you more healing, and as a tank, that's going to be great. So now we'll talk about the second weapon, which is going to be the Warhammer for the tank build. The most important things here is getting Armor Breaker as well as Shockwave. So once you have Armor Breaker and Shockwave, you will have that maximum rend, as well as good damage and the ability to crowd control people. Shockwave is also important because it will be your second taunt, and you do need a second taunt. So having a taunt gem in your hammer, yes, you're going to lose damage again, sadly, but you will have a second taunt, which will allow you to get control of monsters, which is going to be very important because everyone else in the group should be doing more damage than you, right? So they're probably going to have aggro, so this is your way to get aggro away from them. And just a quick TLDR, the way taunt works is that when you use taunt, it's going to raise you to the highest on the aggro table at the time that you use it. So if you taunt a monster before it gets hit, you're not doing anything. So just keep that in mind. Then we have Mighty Gavel, which is just a strong damage move. They keep buffing this move, and it just does ridiculous damage. But the most important thing to note here, along with all these other passives, is just going to be this power through pain. As the tank, you're going to be getting hit all the time, so using this talent will let you do 35% extra damage, which is going to be quite nice. And then on the other side, we just have some simple cooldown reduction and more damage against like targets that are effective with hammer debuffs and stuff like that. So it's all going to be about cooldown reduction and damage over here. Okay, so moving on from the tank, and for tanks, this is obvious. I didn't mention it, but heavy armor is gonna be what you're aiming for, because in order to use the armor, or in order to use like that classification of medium, you also have to have a shield on, and it just gets really funky. I've been experimenting with trying to go medium with a small shield, but it gets a little weird. But I think tower shield is good for the most part, and just go full heavy armor. There are some avenues in the future that I'll try to be doing some small shield because of the perks that are on them, which will increase the damage from the sword and shield. But I'll keep testing on that and let you know fully if that's real or actually just troll. So now we'll go ahead and dive into healer. So the healer is another constant thing that will be going into the dungeon. I would recommend as much focus as you can get, since it will increase your healing output and damage output, and enough constitution to stay alive. I don't know what that number is for you personally. 200 is probably overkill. 100 seems reasonable. Anything less than 100 is you're asking for trouble, in my opinion. If you have light armor, it can be very powerful because you can dish out a lot of damage, but I think medium armor may be the sweet spot for healers in terms of not dying and being able to put out efficient healing and damage bonuses. So that's probably going to come down to playstyle preference, whether you use light or medium, and how much constitution you have, but the rest dumping into focus is just always going to be a good go-to. So now we'll talk about the life staff healing abilities, and this is going to be the best abilities in my opinion. The reasoning is that our objective as the life staff is to keep everyone alive and do a lot of healing. The monsters don't have that big of a threat, to be honest. The second objective is to deal as much damage as we possibly can so that we contribute to the group's overall speed. So we're going to grab a few talents, and one thing to note is you may want to get this Mending Touch, because being able to remove debuffs from targets can be quite valuable. There are a few situations where getting rid of debuffs can really save your life. So we're going to talk about the main abilities here. As you can see, Sacred Ground is a very pivotal part of all healing builds, it's going to be 100% necessary because of this blessed talent giving you 50% more healing. So you could just lay this on the ground in front of your tank and let him stand in that, and he'll be 100% fine no matter what. A lot of the passives increase healing and cooldown reduction when you auto attack, which your auto attacks you're going to be doing quite a lot to get out damage, as well as refund the cooldowns on your skills. So this is going to be very important. And then we're going to go over to the right side tree. I found that Orb of Protection is very valuable because it adds damage. You can hit through a lot of allies, give them regeneration, fortification, and damage the enemy at the same time. It hits very hard. It's quite chunky, so this is going to be a very important ability. Then we have some more talents that increases our healing when dodging, so do not forget to dodge before you heal, so you get that bonus, and increased healing when you have a buff, as well as life staffs lasting longer on the duration of their buffs, which is just going to increase your regeneration effects, as well as your fortify effects also. Not to mention that Sacred Ground also has a fortify on a perk, and the perk for Orb of Protection is very good. If you manage to get it, it will give you 50% increased healing for 36 roughly percent increased healing when you heal a target below 50% HP. So this is going to be very nice to just bump up your healing output. And the last talent I take is Beacon, and the 3 bonuses here to make it last longer and be wider. And this is going to also come with a perk that will increase healing on yourself when you use Beacon just in general. So it's going to be nice to have here. So the idea is to throw out your Sacred Ground and all of your heal over time effects, and then switch, and then either, if you need more healing, keep using damage with the life staff to refund your cooldowns, or this is where we talk about the Void Gauntlet, which is going to be the weapon that you're going to pair with the life staff in dungeons. This, in my opinion, is the best build for the life staff or for the healer in all dungeons, because it's going to allow you to provide a damage bonus for your team with Oblivion. So you're going to be sort of in this mid-range melee range. You're going to drop Oblivion down, which is going to increase their stamina regeneration, as well as increase the amount of damage that they're dealing. So the more Oblivions that you can have up, the better your party is going to do, because they're going to get that 20% empowerment damage boost, which is going to be quite good. A lot of these talents just increase cooldown and damage in general, but we're going to be pairing that with the Void Blade ability, which is just going to be a nice way for you to get in there and start dishing out DPS. It will also lower the armor of the targets that you hit, which is going to be very important, because Rend is not something that will be placed on every single monster in the dungeon, because you can only hit so many with abilities. So using this to help out will give 15% additional rend to anything that you strike, so you can stack that up and put good damage out as well. The other ability will be Void Caller, which just simply does AoE healing and damage in an aura around you when you activate a certain amount of abilities, so it's going to go nice here. And since the Void Gauntlet is a focus scaling weapon at about 60% stat attribution, it's going to be very nice. You will be able to pump out some serious DPS even though you're a healer. Next, on the right side tree, we have a dead talent in the top. I took Deadly Range because, hey, you can get some more damage on ranged attacks. But I've seen some people take Orb of Decay, and I know what you're thinking. There's already 3 talents there. Isn't that a troll? You can only use 3. It is and it isn't. Both of these are kind of useless with this build. So really taking this could allow you to switch it out for a dungeon group that you may need this specifically. It does the same thing as Void Blade, except for you don't have to get in close and personal, and it also adds some extra healing. So if you want some more healing power on top of this build, you can add this in. You only have to take the base talent. The Exploding is, I mean, it's okay, but it's nothing to, like, you know, brag about. But it could be something that you could use, but it's really up to you. It's a minor difference. It really doesn't matter if you play or play without it. The next thing, this is going to be very important as a healer, because it's going to be your way to recuperate your mana, and will also refund all Void Gauntlet abilities by 10% when you cast the block ability or the drain health ability from the Void Gauntlet. So what happens a lot of times is you can heal yourself and keep regenerating health from your heal over time effects and your Sacred Ground while life tapping yourself and getting all your mana back, but you also get all your cooldowns back, so you could just keep spamming Oblivion for your group, and you can also spam this next ability, which is very important for the healer to have. Essence Rupture would be a debuff you would place on the target, and anybody who hits that will life leech 20%. This is going to be phenomenal for keeping your group topped up, and the better your group is, the better value this is going to get, because they're going to be doing more damage, which means they're going to be healing themselves for more, and between that and the heal over times, you probably won't have to heal them very much, and you'll be able to focus on doing damage, which is going to be very nice. Then we have the abilities for it, which will give them additional stamina whenever they hit the target. So that's just going to aid in people's ability to keep dodging and sticking on the target, as well as the tank's ability to recover stamina and be able to block for longer. So this is very important. And then finally, the last talent is going to allow the end of the Essence Rupture to heal people around you, scaling on focus, which is great since you're a healer anyways, so you might as well just heal everyone up. So you're going to be playing as sort of a melee mid-range healer, and I think that that's where that medium armor can probably shine. I've been experimenting with light, but let me tell you, it's a dangerous game. So just be careful what you wish for on that. So those are the two constants, and then the third constant here is going to be the Great Axe and Warhammer melee DPS user. And the reason for this is that Great Axe has the best ability to group monsters in the game, right? Regardless if you use this in Garden of Genesis, where it will do bonus damage, or Lazarus Instrumentality, where it will do slightly reduced damage, but remember that Gravity Well does void damage instead of regular damage, I believe, so this will actually do a little bit more, and that's where a lot of your burst DPS comes from. The ability to group monsters together is what we're after here. We take the basic passive talents all over here to increase the amount of damage that we are doing, as well as the getting us down to the Bloodlust talent at the bottom. That's going to be important to increase our damage and just our speed and mobility so we can keep up with everything. Reap is an important ability because it's going to allow you to pull in archers and ranged mobs that normally want to cast on the side, and you're going to be able to grip them into the group so that you can AoE and nuke all the monsters down at the same time. This is a very important ability because nothing else really has this, the ability to reposition physically a monster. So doing fast dungeon runs is going to be about running ahead, gathering all the monsters, and pulling them into a single location so you can drop all your AoE down and clear the dungeon as fast as possible. This move is very pivotal to that. A second move that's very pivotal is going to be Maelstrom. It is going to pull everything in really close. So it's going to clump them up nice and tight so that everyone can do big AoE damage on top of them. It also shreds projectiles, which is going to be really nice. But do keep in mind that it can shred your allies' projectiles sometimes. So it can be a little sad stories. So just be a little careful with that. Then we also have this next talent, which is going to cause all of your pools to root everyone, so that's going to be your Reap as well as your Maelstrom and your Gravity Well, which we'll talk about here in a second. So that's going to give a small root, which means the monster's not going to be able to do some flips or run away or dodge or whatever the monster wants to do. He's going to be forced to set in place and take damage, which is going to be very nice. And then we have Gravity Well, which is just a classic ability. It's going to pull everything into the middle and make them stick together. It's going to do a big burst of damage, and with the perk, it will do a second burst of damage, which is going to be very powerful. The Crowded Well, which will add extra damage by 10% for each additional target caught in the well. So if you have like 7 or 10 monster group, it's going to do like double damage almost. It's just nutty. And then finally we have Center Attention, which is just going to make us do more damage when there's more monsters or foes around us, which in dungeons is going to happen a lot. So this talent actually gets a lot of value. The other thing that I will say is there is a perk for Maelstrom, which adds a weaken effect after you hit monsters, which can be good in the future if we get like hard dungeons like mutations or something. But for now, I mean, lowering the damage of a monster is probably irrelevant because things just don't hit that hard, right? Like, it's okay, not a big deal. So then we have the Warhammer build, which is going to be the exact same as the tank build. We're just all focused on doing damage, so you can reference that section if you want. It's literally just all going to be the same. So you just do big DPS with the Warhammer because it does crazy damage, especially in the Lazarus Instrumentality area. It can definitely be very, very, very powerful. Not to mention adding extra armor rends to more diverse targets so you can, rend a target that the tank wasn't able to get to and just keep up that constant ability increase or damage increase for your team. So those are going to be very, very pivotal to the team. So it's going to be top 3 builds there. And now we have some, in my opinion, this one is pseudo required. Which is going to be the Mage, which is going to be a Fire Staff. There's 2 builds here. So it's going to be Fire Staff Void Gauntlet or Ice Gauntlet Void Gauntlet. And that's going to depend on what dungeon you're doing. This is where your build will differ. This one won't differ. It won't be super constant. So for Garden of Genesis, you're going to want the Fire Staff. And in my opinion, this is the best Fire Staff build for Garden of Genesis. I've seen some people experimenting with Flamethrower, and it's definitely not bad. So shout out to some of my guild members who are looking into that. But it's yet to be fully tested, so we'll see in the long run. But you're basically just going to take Pillar of Fire, which is going to add AoE damage. And when monsters are all clumped up together, you will really start to see this ability shine, as well as Fireball, which is a classic mage ability. If you can get them all into one point, they're going to take tons of damage from the impact, as well as the burning field that's going to remain on the ground, which will definitely add up. The talents on this side will make our auto attacks do additional damage over time, which is what we're mostly going to be doing, is auto attacking when we don't have cooldowns. And then we also have a lot of just general damage increases like crit damage, crit strike chance, and finally the Runes of Helios talent, which makes us do 25% more damage on autos and spells while we're standing in this sort of rune circle when we cast an ability. So that's going to be nice to have. Going on to the right side tree, we will take Pyromania and Let It Burn just to get down here. And then we'll get Kindle, which is going to increase all of our damage over time abilities from burning. And then Watch It Burn is an important ability, as your crit hits with the Fire Staff on spells will now inflict a dot damage. So whenever you critically hit with Pillar of Fire or Burnout, whatever you do, that'll be nice. And then Burnout's a good mobility tool to get into melee range. And also it does some nasty damage and damage over time ability on top of it, as well as giving you cooldown per target hit. So if you use all your cooldowns and then you use Burnout, you will be able to probably recuperate a good chunk of them by simply using this ability. So moving on, for the Mage, we had the Void Gauntlet build, and for the Mage, you can play with Essence Rupture. However, I think it's a little bit better to play with the Petrifying Scream over here. So instead of taking this Essence Rupture and the talents on the right side, you would just simply take every single talent on the left side. So you're going to be a melee damage, essentially, in this regard. So you're going to cast your fire spells, then switch to your Void Gauntlet, cast your Oblivion, and then go to town with the Void Blade. If you're in the Angry Earth dungeon or the Garden of Genesis, you might want to stick more on the Fire Staff. If you are in the Lazarus Instrumentality, you will switch it up with another weapon on the Fire Staff, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But anyways, this side is just going to play with the Void Blade, as we talked about before. Same concept with the Life Staff and the Oblivion thing. And then we're also going to have the addition of Petrifying Scream, which will give you a stagger as well as damage and root targets in place, which will help with that damage bonus against targets that are CC'd, as well as stop enemies from getting out of the grouping that you have pulled them into. And then the other talent on the end here is going to give you Fortify for every target hit. In dungeons, this is going to be all the time, so you're going to have permanent 30% Fortify, as well as 20% Fortify coming from the Void Blade. So as you can imagine, you will be very, very tanky. I think the Mage is probably best played with like high intellect and as much constitution as you can get away with, so somewhere between 100 to 200 constitution, but 200 constitution is probably too much. So I would say 100 constitution and 400 intellect would be very nice. And I think medium armor is going to do very well for the Mage, since you do need to get in a little bit close with the Void Gauntlet and you can take some hits. You could play with light armor, but again, it's going to be player skill preference, as you could get deleted if you don't have enough constitution and light armor bonuses to back that up. So next we're going to talk about the second weapon for the Mage, and this is going to be the one you would want to switch to instead of the Fire Staff when you go to Lazarus Instrumentality, which is going to be the Ice Gauntlet. Yeah, this build looks weird. It definitely does. It does for sure. Trust me on this though. This is going to be some of the highest damage that you can get. So the idea behind this is that since we're in Lazarus Instrumentality, we want to be in the Void Gauntlet majority of the time. So having the Ice Pylon out and the ability when the Ice Pylon hits to increase its lifetime duration means that your Ice Pylon will be doing constant damage for you for free while you're using your active Void Gauntlet abilities. So this is going to give you high uptime and damage on a single target. Ice Storm will provide a lot of AoE damage to targets in a group or a clump, as well as Ice Spikes doing the exact same thing. And then we take the final talent down here, which will make our Ice Spikes have an additional 2 spires that shoot out to the left and right, so it makes it a very strong burst ability. If you hit all of this on the target exactly and time it right, this thing can hit for like 8 to 10k. It's really crazy. So it definitely can hit quite hard, as well as eliminate clusters of enemies. A few of these talents will just further increase damage and crit chance, and then the final talent will give us Ultimate Chill, which will cause the abilities from the Ice Gauntlet to increase the ice damage dealt to the target by 25% for 3 seconds. I've seen some people make some interesting builds around this where they would use some like aquamarine gems and increase ice damage. That's a little crazy for me, but you can do with it what you will. But it's definitely a powerful talent to have, and it will further increase your pylon damage as well as any of your AoE abilities here. So you're going to be able to do a lot of chunky damage along with your consistent damage coming out from the Void Gauntlet, which will do quite nicely in terms of DPS for Lazarus. So now we have talked about those 4. That's going to be the top 4 builds. And now the last build, we're going to have a bit of a decision here. You could just simply clone one of the DPS builds like the Great Axe Warhammer or the Fire Staff Void Gauntlet or Ice Staff Void Gauntlet if you're in Lazarus. Or you can take one of the other categories, and in my opinion, the 2 rising stars in this patch coming into 1.2 is probably going to be the Spear and the Rapier. They have both received several significant buffs, so I could see a Dex user coming into play for this 5th socket here. The bow does phenomenal damage as well as AoE damage, so I think you would probably use the bow, most likely, along with the Spear or the Rapier, your choice. But I think if you're going to lean more towards this Rapier, it may be better to go a full melee build with Rapier and Spear and really start focusing on those bleeds and damage. So we'll talk about all of those, as this 5th option will be kind of a flex for you. I just want to give you an idea, because these builds can do a lot of damage, but it's like selfish damage. They don't increase the group in any way, shape, or form, but they can really be a superstar if you play them correctly. I think you would play this build, if you were the melee build, I would probably play it with higher constitution, so something like 350 dex and 150 con. But if you're the ranged build, you could probably play with like 400 dex, 100 con easily, maybe a little bit more if you want to get greedy. I think light armor is fantastic for the ranged build. If you're the Rapier and Spear build, I would probably go medium for that. So first we'll talk about the ranged version, which would be the bow, and then you would pair that with either one of these weapons, whether it would be the Spear or the Rapier, so we'll talk about that after. So for the bow, we are going to take the Hunter Tree. We're going to get a lot of these talents to increase our just damage in general for targets that are far away, as well as Penetrating Shot being a fantastic ability that will rip through crowds and deal tons of damage. Then we will move and take Aim True and Opening Strike, although we would probably not use these except for at the start of an encounter, but they're just point fillers to get down to our final talent. And then we'll take Surprise Attack, which is going to do more damage to any enemy you hit for the first time, which is not too shabby. Hawkeye returning life whenever you hit somebody in the head at 10% rate, and then Bow getting 10% crit, which is going to be a very important ability. Finally, we top that all off with Concussion. Headshots do 20% more damage and have a 50% chance to get your arrow back, so you get a little bit of refund there. Next, we move to the left side tree, where we will have Evasive Tactics, giving us 20% more damage when we dodge. So make sure to dodge and keep that buff window up before you start using your abilities and your big damage cooldowns. Next, we have Closing In, which will give you more ability cooldown when you hit something below half, which will be very important because, in my opinion, the bow is all about getting cooldowns back. In that note, I would probably want a weapon with Refreshing Move on it so that you can keep shooting light attacks and get your cooldowns back fast, because the bow tends to have long AoE cooldowns. And the faster you can get those AoE cooldowns back, the more damage you can deal. That's going to bring us into our second skill, which is going to be Rain of Arrows, which does a lot of AoE damage as well as a nasty bleed, which is going to be applied to everyone hit, so this is a very powerful move. Next, we're going to take Poison Shot, which is going to cause a cloud dealing dot damage and hit decently hard. We're also going to take the further increased damage over time ability, and we're going to skip on this final talent because it only works against one particular target, and we're just running out of points, and I feel that these other two passives are very important. Mark letting you do 10% more damage to anything suffering from a debuff, and then the Battle Precision, which makes your damage over time abilities and debuffs last 20% longer, which means they're doing 20% 20% more damage. So that's going to apply for your poison shot as well as your rain of arrows. Poison shot can have a perk which applies weaken to every one hit, which can be very powerful in the mutated dungeons in the future, but for now it's kind of nice to have, but not super necessary. So do keep in mind that this build will deal quite a lot of damage, but as we see with the monsters in the Angry Earth dungeon or the Garden of Genesis, they do take reduced thrust damage, which is pretty much what all the bow does, is thrust damage. In the Ancients dungeon, the Lazarus instrumentality, you'll be quite fine with this though. And then we will talk about our 2 rising stars here, which I want to see a lot more of because I really believe in their damage capabilities. Although right now the Angry Earth and Ancients enemies aren't the best for thrusting type damage, the bleeds will go through and you will still be able to do quite a significant amount of damage. And I'm pretty sure with a lot of these buffs, you will even exceed the damage bonus of some of the other weapons. But again, very selfish builds. So with this range build, you could pair it with the spear or the rapier. So just keep that in mind. So the spear, the best build here is going to be the right side Impaler Tree, which is going to give you the skewer ability. It does a nasty damage over time ability, increasing the DPS by 20% weapon damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. So this bleed is going to be very powerful. You can further increase that to 15 seconds and then extend that bleed even longer every time you crit. And there's a lot of bonuses to having debuffs and bleeds on the target within this tree. So we'll go down to this other important thing because this is all going to be about crit and debuffs. That's what the spear is about. So we're going to do 20% more damage. We're going to get 20% in power if our skewer critically hits. So this will be a very significant damage boost to a lot of our abilities. We have another talent over here, Vault Kick, which is going to stun the targets, which is going to give us AoE interruption, and it will also let us gain in power if we hit something below 50% health. So right now that's 20% from the Vault Kick and another 20% if the skewer crits, which means we could have up to 40% in power right there, which is going to add up quite significantly. The next one we have is that continuous motion, which whenever you use the Vault Kick, if you hit it successfully, all other cooldowns are reduced by 30%. So this will be phenomenal in spamming your abilities over and over. And speaking of spamming your abilities, we also have aggressive maneuvers. Whenever you dodge after you hit with an ability, you refund all spear cooldowns by 20%. So again, you're going to enter this endless cycle of being able to spam out spear cooldowns if you want to. Exposed wounds will give you 15% additional crit chance against any target that is bleeding, which is going to be very important, as well as the crits extending that damage over time effects. And then finally, we're going to top that all off with exploited weakness. You're going to get 10% bonus damage for every debuff your target has. And since your group will be adding tons of debuffs, I'm imagining this will always be at max, so 30% damage bonus. So you can see where it's starting to get very crazy, right? 30% bonus damage plus another 20% from Vault Kick plus another 20% from the skewer crit, and it can get very nasty. There's also a perk for Vault Kick, which will increase your crit chance by 18% for a duration once you use it. So that's going to be a very important perk to have with this kit here. So next we have the Zoner Tree, and we're going to be focusing on doing heavy attacks in between our abilities. So we have this Deadly Consistency, which increases the amount of damage you can deal to a single target whenever you use a heavy attack, 10% stacking up to 3 times. So that's additional 30% damage. So if you get on a boss with this, you're going to start to shred him really hard. We also have Deadly Reach, which will increase your crit chance again if you're a little bit further away from your target. And then the Refreshing Reach, which every heavy attack you do is going to reduce all your spear cooldowns by 15%. So once again, spam cooldowns. You're going to get them all day long. It's going to be crazy. Then we have Sweep, which is going to do a decent amount of damage, but the final talent is where it's at, Coup de Grace, which is going to give you 150% extra damage, which recently got buffed with the 1.2 patch and keeps getting buffed. There's so much buff on this weapon. And then there is a perk that's also going to give you a 50% bleed. Not to mention this move will knock down all targets, which will stun them. So when you have them grouped, it's very nice because it will just flatten them all on the floor and you'll continue to deal tons of damage. That follow-up stab can also be increased by 25% raw damage bonus with the Merciless Strength talent, which is just going to further increase your DPS coming out from this weapon. So I'm a big fan of Spear right now. I think that in PVE is going to be where it really shines because you can get some really nutty damage here. And since it doesn't suffer from that, like, I have to chase you down and hit you with a slow move on like PvP opponents that are dodging, this is going to be a really good weapon for PvE. And next, we'll go ahead and talk about the Rapier. And the Rapier is going to be different for PvE than it is PvP. As you can see, I am on the Blood Tree here, and I'm a firm believer in the Blood Tree. I think it does an insane amount of damage. I just think that people haven't caught up to it yet because previously no one wanted to do this, right? And this is a PvE only thing. Don't try this in PvP. It's not going to go very well for you, but we're going to go ahead and talk about it. So the first ability is going to be Tondo. Tondo is going to extend a 5-meter wide slash in front of you. It's very big. It's going to hit a lot of people. It does weapon damage and then a nasty bleed over time, 85% weapon damage over 12 seconds, but more importantly, it's going to stack 3 times. It also has a very low cooldown. You can see 5.9 on my screen here. There are a few talents here that are going to be added in. When you apply the first stack of bleed to an opponent, the cooldown is going to be reduced, and if you ever hit a single target, even if they block, the cooldown is reduced even further. So as you can see, we can hit 3 stacks very, very quickly with Tondo. This used to be a 12-second cooldown, which made it really hard, and that was the reason why people didn't use this, but it recently got changed now down to a 5.9, which is 50% lowered cooldown, and I think that this is really going to be, in my opinion, the #1 damage dealing weapon to a single target in the game. I really truly believe that going forward with the right build, right? With the right build. So now we'll talk about the next ability, which is going to be Flourish. Well, actually, we'll skip over that. We'll go over here to Flurry. Flurry is going to be an ability that will give you 5 quick hits, and each strike will do a certain amount of damage and more towards the end. The bonuses is going to do more damage if somebody blocks for like stamina damage. So if anybody's blocking, you're going to pierce through that guard, and sometimes enemies do that. Every hit of the Flurry will reduce the cooldown of that Flurry by 7%. So 5 hits is going to mean 35% reduced cooldown. So if you connect all of your strikes, this skill is getting a lot lower on the cooldown window. And then finally, we have the important ability, which is called To the Bone. And every Flurry hit will extend the Rapier bleeds by 1 second. And you're thinking, okay, cool, it's going to bleed longer. That's interesting, but it will really come into play here in a second, and we'll explain why. But the future stack applications of this will be extended by the bleed count as well, so that means that you're going to further be increasing it up. So if it lasts 12 seconds and you hit Flurry 5 times, it's now a 17-second bleed, and it's going to be doing more damage over time. Basically, this will come into play with Flourish and Finish, which is the final ability we'll talk about. You're going to do a quick slash, which will kind of knock enemies back, and then you press the light attack button. You're going to dash forward and pierce, and when you use that piercing motion, you're going to deal weapon damage, plus you're going to pop every single bleed on the target for 110% of the damage immediately. So if you have 3 stacks of Tondo, it's going to do 85% weapon damage per second over 12 seconds, and then it's going to do 110% of that total amount. So this is going to be very crazy, right? You're talking a lot of burst DPS right there. Now, the next ability is going to add grit to that ability so that you can't get interrupted. Then you're going to get stamina when you finish it off, and then we're going to get into the interesting stuff. Each tick of damage from Tondo's bleed reduces the cooldown of this ability by 3.5%. So while this ability is on cooldown, every second that goes past, as long as you have Tondo bleed on somebody, it's going to keep coming back up. And if you have multiple opponents with bleed on them, it's just going to be up faster and faster. And then finally, the very most important ability, Bloody End, is going to allow the finish damage of the bleeds to be increased by 150% from that 110, so that's going to be massive. So whenever you use this Flourish and Finish, it's just going to explode for a ton of damage, and it's just going to be really crazy. So now we'll talk about some of the passive talents that go along with this. This one is going to be one of the most important abilities. Every Rapier hit is going to be reduced all of the cooldowns by 1%. So every time you hit with the Rapier, you reduce all your cooldowns by 1%. So you're going to be constantly getting your cooldowns back while you auto in between the time in which they're down. The next one is going to increase 5% damage on any target with a Rapier Bleed, which is just a raw DPS increase. You're going to do 10% more damage to your target when they have more than half health, which is going to be very useful. And then finally we have the Light Edge, which increases the damage from the middle swipe and the light attack chain by 8%. So it's going to allow you to do this like sort of double hit when you light attack, and it's going to increase that, which is going to be the one that we're after here. The ideal concept is to use Tondo, use Flurry, use Flourish and Fendish, and then auto-attack until your Tondo's back up. Keep spamming Tondo, and then auto-attacks Tondo, auto-attacks Tondo, and if you get that Flurry back, then you use it again, and then you finally pop a 3-stack bleed on your opponent with the Flourish and Finish, which is going to be crazy DPS. Going on to the right side, we're going to get 10% more damage when your stamina is below 40%. It's a little hard to manage, in my opinion, but it can happen sometimes. Then we're going to do 10% more damage when our health is full. Again, it's not the best ability as you may be hit, but your healer should be able to keep you topped up with a lot of those heal over time effects, so it might be useful. Not to mention, there are perks for Flurry, which we'll go ahead and talk about after here in a second. So we'll just get onto this final talent here. This is going to be very important. Red Curtains, which is going to reduce all cooldowns by 5% when you critically strike. So crit chance is going to be huge for this build. It's going to give you all your cooldowns back. You're just going to be spamming bleed abilities all over the place. So you're just be doing tons of single target damage and AoE damage because Tondo has a massive strike range and it's going to bleed every single target. So now we'll talk about perks here. The Tondo perk is going to increase your crit chance by like 18% whenever you hit somebody with a bleed. So that's going to be insane. The Flurry perks are going to add leeching, life leeching to your abilities, or to the Flurry ability. So you're going to life leech for 30% of the damage done, which should top you off and keep you full for Perfectionist most of the time. And then I think the Flourish and Finish, the perk is not really good. It just adds stamina or something crazy like that. So we usually skip over that one. But it's very nice to have that in this tree. So as you could see, you could go with a Spear and Rapier build where you put on bleeds and keep stacking them and focus primary damage on the Rapier so that you do a lot of DPS. And I think the other option would be the Bow and Spear build where you would just keep up the bleed from your Spear and then keep using your bow cooldowns and get them back over and over. So the option is there and it's for you to use. You can do with that what you will. All right, that has been a lot of stuff, and it's definitely many things to cover there for PVE and, the Garden of Genesis and Lazarus Instrumentality instance. Just want to thank you for sticking with it this whole time. I appreciate you watching. I know it was a long one, so there's a lot of probably information to process there, but we got through it, and that's all good. We'll be doing some more guides in the future for arenas as well as invasions, because I know a lot of people are interested in that PvE element, so we'll make sure to get on top of that. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the bell for the channel. We also have a join button if you wish to become a member today, and we have a Discord in the link down below, so you can check that one out if you want to just chat with us or hang out with a like-minded community. Thanks for your time and watching the video. As always, I appreciate the support, and we will catch you in the next one.